All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lightworker Academy. This class today on empowered empathy. And I'm kind of curious if we can do a little, either a little show of hands or a shout out. Who thinks they've been to most or all of the classes so far? The Lightworker Academy classes? No, I feel like it's probably Stephanie. And Stephanie, we don't have your video on right now, but I feel like you've been to most, if not all of these, which is awesome. And then we do have a couple people who are tuning in for the first time. And then we've also had, we've got some people here who are kind of in the middle on that. So awesome. Welcome, everybody, regardless of where you're at. And Stephanie says, yep, okay, I thought so. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I welcome everybody. In case you have missed some of the classes, if you want to go back and catch up on them, then they're all in Lightworker Portal, and I believe everybody here is a member of Lightworker Portal. If you're tuning in later and you're not, then there are plenty of links to find that. It's the free online community that I created just for you, just for Lightworkers like us, that has links and videos to all of the previous class recordings as well as all of my podcast episodes. So if you want to catch up, know that each of these classes it's an independent piece of knowledge, but they do relate to each other. So each class is complete in its own, but knowing, okay, we're moving through an overall trajectory in our arc of experience together. So Lightworker Academy is a 12-class series. They're all free, they're all online, they're once a month for an entire year. And this particular curriculum is taken little bits and pieces from a live training that I'm offering coming up here in October. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about that at the end of our time together. So that training, just to put it on your radar, is October 10 through 13, and it's just outside of Portland. It's all day for 4 days. And that curriculum is really intensive healership training for people who want to master their healership practice and become the fully empowered healer that they were born to be. So if that's you, we can talk about this later. And know that our 12-class series of these Lightworker Academy classes, these free classes, are taken little bits and pieces from the 4-day curriculum. So if you have been tuning in, you've been getting little snippets of what we'll be spending a great deal of time on this October in a beautiful retreat center setting. Just to zoom out for a moment, in case you missed the first class in January, the first class was on the 3 essentials of alchemy for Lightworkers. And that is the trajectory of how we've been going through our classes so far. So working with the 3 essentials, salt, mercury, and sulfur. If you don't know what that means, go ahead and watch that class because it's really, really fascinating and you'll get a lot out of it. But looking at working with the salt principle, essentially the physical body and the earthly realm, the mercury principle, meaning our spirit, our personal spirit, animating force, our imagination, consciousness, and then working with the sulfur, which is the soul level, the karmic level, the very subtle energetic level. So we spent our first handful of classes in Lightworker Academy working in the salt level, talking about earth magic, talking about the medicine wheel, talking about embodied body wisdom, talking about shamanic embodiment practice. And now we've shifted into the mercury level. This class is in the mercury level. We're talking about empowered empathy today. We also, in the mercury level, we've talked about our next class coming up actually is cultivating your intuition. Last month we talked about cycles of power. So we've been working in this animating force consciousness realm. And then pretty soon here, coming up in, I believe, 2 months, we're shifting into the sulfur level. So talking about some very high vibration soul concepts such as soul retrieval and soul contracts and agreements and karma stuff. So we're moving through the levels of vibration throughout the year. I wanted to take a moment and just zoom out so that you could know that that's where we're going with this. And that in the I Am Lightworker training, which is the 4-day training, if you choose to come to that, we'll be spending 4 days very deep diving into a lot of these practices. And of course, they include what we're talking about here in these classes, but you know, it's in person. We've got a group of 20 of our new Lightworker family here together doing really powerful work. So I want to put that on your radar, and if you're interested, I'll have an invitation for that for you at the end of our class today. But before we do that, let's go ahead and set it all aside. We're going to take a moment here to do a little bit of a meditation. So go ahead and set everything down, your notebook, your pens, your coffee. I'll do the same. And let's go ahead and take a moment to simply arrive in whatever you need, moving your posture, roll the shoulders back a couple of times, making any adjustments that you need to be in a space of receptive awareness and noticing. And when you're ready, go ahead and close your eyes. And let's take a couple of moments to arrive fully in the body with the breath, exhaling everything out together. Deep inhale. Exhale with a sigh. Again, deep inhale into the belly. Exhale with a sigh. 2 more, just like that. Deep breath in all the way down. Sighing out, releasing anything you don't need. 1 more. Deep breath in. Exhale. Letting your breath flow in and out like waves. Finding that natural rhythm of breath washing in and breath washing out. Let's take a few breaths to focus on the exhale, inviting everything that we don't need to simply flow out. Other people's energy, grocery lists, appointments later, tasks, projects, whatever it is that you don't need right now, just go ahead and sigh it out. Making very subtle adjustments. We're not banishing these thoughts. We're not shoving them out of the way. We're just very gently excusing them, excusing these energies. And as you find that natural flow of your breath, bringing your attention inside the body, following the inhale down into the internal environment, internal body. Now let's just take a moment to notice, what is the state of my energy and my body right now? What's the state of, you can ask this question in a few layers. So perhaps first, what is the state of my body right now, my physical body? And shift your awareness slightly to ask, what is the state of my mind right now? Give that a nod of acknowledgement and turn your awareness to ask, what is the state of my heart, my emotions right now? Give that a nod of acknowledgement and 1 more shift to look at the subtle energy body. What is the state of my auric field, my subtle energy body right now? And whatever you notice, go ahead and give it a bow of gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you for showing up, for showing me what's happening in my body and my field. And we're allowing everything that we notice to simply be. We're not trying to change anything or adjust anything right now at this time. This is simply our temperature check. We will return to later. So for now, bringing all this awareness back with you to present time awareness, coming back into consciousness, coming back to the body, rolling the shoulders. Maybe give a little stretch, wiggle the fingers and toes, opening your eyes. Okay, how'd that go? What did we notice? Anyone want to do a real quick share, maybe one or two people real fast here? Anything you noticed that either surprised you or felt important? No? No surprises, nothing important? Oh, wow. Okay, great. Or any, oh, Manka, you look like you're trying to unmute yourself. Jess says, my aura was a little outside, meaning outside your body. Stacy says, things shifted even though I wasn't trying. Yeah, okay. That's really common. Jess says, yeah, like in front of me. Okay, so your aura was, you were experiencing it outside of your body rather than also internally, right? Because remember, our auric field, our energy body is present internal within the physical body, but also outside the physical body. Okay. And Stacy says, things shifted even though I wasn't trying. Yeah, that's very, very common. Even if we're not necessarily intending to create shifts, then we often experience them that way. So good noticing. Okay, great. We're going to do some more stuff with that. So remember what you noticed, and we're going to circle back around to it later. All right. So what we're talking about today, we're talking about empathy. And a very particular brand of empathy called empowered empathy. Now, I don't know if anyone else calls it this, but I certainly do. And we're going to talk a little bit about why and what that means. Specifically, what is empathy and how does it work, right? Does anyone know how empathy actually works? Maybe, other than just it's telepathy, because it is that, but it's more than that. Okay, so we're going to look at that. We're going to talk about the challenges that we experience as empaths and the challenges that we have to mastering empathy, but then also how to master empathy and how to turn it from this feeling of surviving as an empath and being at the whim of your empathy to thriving as an empath and being a fully empowered empathic person in the world and not having it kick your ass, because I'm guessing that some of you have had that experience, / probably all of us have had that experience. Then we're going to do an exercise together to return kind of to that touch point that we set here just now in that meditation. And then at the end of our time together, I have an invitation for you as well as a giveaway. So stick around for the end of class today and you'll get to hear about both of those super fun, awesome things. So what is empathy and how does it work? First of all, before we begin, can I take a little poll here on who in our class environment identifies as an empath? Either go ahead and raise your hand or type yes into the chat box. Tish says yes. Stacy's nodding. Manka, I know you're in it. Yeah, kind of. Okay. Jess says yes. Stephanie says yes. Right. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here, right? So what is an empath and what does that actually mean? First of all, I will say being an empath has a lot of stigma around it, right? And it usually sounds like, and it's usually a burden, a stigma of burden, right? Of, oh, I can't go to the store because I feel overwhelmed by other people's emotions. And I can't watch the news because I get really overwhelmed by the news. And, you know, some of this might be true, but empathy has a lot of negative connotation. And it's so funny. I had actually, I had a half-day training the other day. On Sunday, I had a handful of people over, and we were talking about empowered energy and what it means to be empowered in our energy body and our skills and tools of how we're working with our energy body. And the topic of empathy came up, talking about how a lot of people use their empathy either as an excuse or as a crutch or as a reason to not be fully empowered in the world. And today we are calling bullshit on that. And I say this with so much love and compassion because I used to be that person. And every now and then I do still have those moments, but it's when I'm not feeling empowered that I feel overpowered by my empathy. And I'm betting you've had this experience too, right? Has anyone ever had that experience of like, oh my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed by my heart right now and by my empathy, and it just feels like too much? Yeah. I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. Okay, great. So we know what that's like. We know what it's like to not feel empowered in our empathy. But what we're talking about here today is an empowered version of how we still maintain our empathy and how we feel connected. Jess says, oh, yes. Yeah. I'm seeing the chat box over there. Okay. How we still feel connected to our empathy, but not like it's kicking our butts. And this is where we get to rewrite the story of what it means to be an empath and what it means to use our empathy as an intentional power, as opposed to something that's kind of governing our lives in a way that we don't like. So empathy at its simplest form is energetic resonance and resonating with energy frequencies. That's the most basic form. And it is a form of telepathy, which means feeling things, essentially. Telepathy is feeling at a distance. Right? And so what we're doing is we're perceiving energy frequencies, we're perceiving resonance, we're perceiving thought forms, emotions, physical sensations of others in our own experience. And this can take place, usually if we're in a crowd or if we're around someone who's having a really intense experience. Have you ever been around someone who's, having a very intense emotional experience and then all of a sudden you start feeling that, right? That's empathy, right? And it's a thing. It's a totally natural thing. And I would say also being an empath is not the exception, it's the rule. We are born as empaths, and most of us shut it down or don't ever learn how to use it. And so then we see someone who is in touch with their empathy as abnormal, or as someone who is an exception, or too sensitive, or a hypersensitive or highly sensitive person. And yet there's a unique composition within the mammalian nervous system called mirror neurons. So there's actually a neurological component to empathy that scientists have studied. And what mirror neurons do is they inform us, they react to other beings exhibiting emotion or behavior. And so they can actually look at for example, one of the studies that I saw was around a neuron that fires when the monkey raises his arm. And so they put like little electrodes and they were looking at, okay, so what neuron fires when the arm is raised like this? And they were able to isolate it, and they were able to say like, okay, this neuron is responsible for this. And then they had the experience of one of the researchers like raising his arm to eat ice cream, and the monkey's neuron fired. So even though the monkey wasn't raising his arm, that mirror neuron fired because he saw the researcher raise his arm. So on the neurological level, we have a biomechanical component of our bodies that responds and does the same thing as someone else's neurons, essentially. So researcher neuron fires, monkey neuron fires, even though the monkey isn't raising its arm. So we have a component in our bodies that is very, very useful. And if we think just for a moment about why this might be useful, right? Why evolutionarily, and this is where my science brain loves to come in, of like, why would that help us evolutionarily to have mirror neurons and to have empathy, right? Let's maybe just popcorn style some responses of why might empathy be an evolutionary advantage, either for our physical safety, health and well-being, emotional safety, health and well-being. Tribe, Stephanie says tribe, absolutely, right? So connecting with community and forming a group that enables our survival. Jess says to be an example for change. Awesome. Yeah, okay, so that's looking a little bit out kind of in the future of where can we take this. Manka says learning by example, right? And adjusting. Yeah, as kids, right? We mirror behavior. We learn how to use our bodies through mirroring behavior. And so when our mirror neurons are firing, we're actually learning how to move our bodies, how to do certain behaviors. And Jess is saying to be an example for change, right? So this is a little bit of where we're going with how do we use our empathy as a superpower? right? But imagine also, say, for example, in terms, to go back to Stephanie's point around tribe, it's useful for forming emotional attachments, but also for indicating danger or a threat, right? Imagine if you're perceiving energy that suddenly doesn't feel safe to you, it signals your body and your nervous system well before there's actually an apparent danger, right? Has anyone ever had that feeling of either being around an animal that wasn't exhibiting any signs, but then you felt like a little off about, and then there was some sign of aggression, or being around somebody who you can tell feels really off even if they seem okay, and then all of a sudden they explode? Anyone ever had that experience? Right. So that's our empathy, right? That's our bodies resonating, our mirror neurons resonating with someone else's energy. And so we have the neurological component, but we also have, and I like to bring in that science aspect, but we also have the energy aspect of looking at resonance that's created. So knowing that tuning forks, for example, if you have two tuning forks next to each other and you strike one tuning fork, the other tuning fork will actually start to vibrate. So even if you don't hit the second tuning fork, it will pick up on the resonance of the first one and start to vibrate. And we're the same way. If somebody's energy is vibrating at a frequency, we naturally start to vibrate at that frequency. And this can be an advantage and a disadvantage. It can be an advantage because then we start to know, we get to have some insight and have some connection, right? It can be really connection forming. It can also be really butt kicking. If someone's vibrating at a frequency, an unhealthy frequency, and we start to vibrate at that, oh, that's really uncomfortable, right? And so this is where we start to bring in some of these tools that help us to have an empowered relationship with that. Just one or two more little science things, and then we'll get to some energy tools about this. 90%, excuse me, something like 90% of our communication is nonverbal, right? So we're talking here now, but there's so many other things going on under the surface in terms of, and all of the nonverbal communication falls into many realms, right? It falls into body language, it falls into to facial expression and facial reading, it falls into tone of voice, right? But it also falls into heart resonance, and falls into energetic communication, and falls into the functioning of mirror neurons, and falls into the emotional realm, right? So of course, we look at, oh, well, body language is an easy one, but what about when you're not physically present with somebody? There's still nonverbal communication happening. Even if you're not actually talking with someone, there's still energetic communication happening. And it's really, really important to acknowledge, again, that 90% of the way in which we communicate has nothing to do with the words that are being said. So it's about time we start paying attention to that, right? Yeah. And then, so one other piece, I'm going to throw one other number at you that might blow your minds a little bit. So let's remember the tuning into our body and our energy field exercise that we just did a few moments ago. Something like 70 to 80% of the energy in your field doesn't actually belong to you. That's a little bit mind-blowing, right? Like something like 70 to 80% of the energy in our fields is not coming from us. It's coming from our environment. It's coming from other people. It's coming from influences. But we think it's ours. Right? We assume, okay, well, if it's in my field, it belongs to me. Most of it doesn't. Most of it comes from things that we're reading, things that we're seeing, people that we're talking to. And Jess says that is seriously mind-blowing. I didn't think it would be that high. Yeah. And that, if you're interested, that comes from some Jonathan Goldman teaching. So he talks about that if you want to tune in a little bit more to that. It's much, much higher than we think. And what that means for us is, are we taking responsibility, and are we claiming energies that we have no business claiming? And what is our sense of self based on, right? If our sense of self is based on all these energies in our field, right, then that's not really coming from us. It's coming from the synthesis of all these influences. It's coming from watching the news. It's coming from social media. It's coming from your best friend's bad mood. It's coming from your partner worrying about stuff. It's coming from your kids. It's coming from your food. It's coming from, blah, 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 all these things. And yet we're claiming that. And so as an empath, especially if we're receiving all these things, our natural tendency is to want to claim it, and quite often to want to feel it and want to bring it in, because that's what we're doing intuitively, right? As we say, okay, well, I'm claiming this, I'm working with this energy. And I'm here to tell you that as an empowered empath, that's not really what we're going to do. We're going to do something a little bit differently. Sound good? Yeah, cool. Game changing, Jess says. I love it. Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and, before we get into to some of the challenges around empathy, any questions before we continue? Go ahead and unmute yourself or type it in the chat box. Any questions around what is empathy and how does it work? We talked about kind of energetically how it works, and also scientifically we have this component of our nervous system that contributes to this. Any other thoughts or questions?
I just maybe like to share why I was not clear before. I can sense other people's energy, but I guess I block the moments when I have control to not feel everything. So that's what was confusing for me, being an empath. So
yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Manka. So you're saying you can sense other people's energy, but you don't necessarily let it in, right? And this is part of what we're going to be talking about, right? Because if we view being an empath as something that puts us in a dangerous position, right? Like, oh, I don't want to be an empath because I might take on other people's energy, right? Or I don't want to feel that. This is one of the pieces that we're going to be talking about in the challenges of this, is we cannot selectively numb ourselves. We can't. It's either kind of an all or nothing deal, but there are tools that we can use to help us feel really empowered so that we can still have our empathy on high and not get our butts kicked by it, right? Who would like that? Would you want that? To still be connected to your empathy and not have it kick your butt? Yeah, me too. Okay. And it is possible, right? These are tools that I've cultivated. These are tools that I teach people. These are tools that I see other people use. It is possible. So let's talk about challenges of mastering empathy. Manka brought up a really good one of how do we, essentially asking the question, how do we still stay connected to our empathy without letting it overwhelm us or hurt us, right? And this is one of the biggest pieces, is overwhelm. Right? One of the biggest challenges to being an empath is overwhelm or pain, right? Whether that's physical or emotional pain. Knowing that if you're doing healing work, I know we've got some healers here. If you're doing healing work, are you actually feeling that person's physical pain in your body? Are you feeling a resonance of it, a shadow of it? Are you just knowing it's there? Do you take it into your body to process it? Are you feeling overwhelmed by stuff that doesn't belong to you? All of these are major challenges of being an empath. We also have what I would call kind of the biggest challenge point is discernment, which essentially involves learning to tell the difference between what is mine and what is not mine. Right? Remember that 70 to 80% I mentioned earlier, about 70 to 80% of our energy in our field doesn't belong to us. How do we know? Right? And that really comes down to discernment, cultivating discernment practice. Most of us don't have that because most of us never had to learn, right? This is the thing of we're now learning thankfully through this kind of spiritual evolution of humanity. We're now having access to more teachings and more awareness of honestly super basic shit that has been around for the entirety of human history, right? Just because it's a function of our energies and our bodies. And now we're finally starting to recognize it and have a context for it and have an ability to work with it in a different way. So this is stuff that ideally we all would have grown up knowing, except we didn't, and now we're getting to catch up. So good news is we still have access to this. Hi, CJ. I'm going to put you on mute for our call. Thanks for being here. I'm glad you're here. Okay. And CJ, you can go ahead and unmute yourself when I open up for questions or use the chat box. Awesome. So discernment, overwhelm, and pain. We also have protection and grounding and energetic regulation as another main challenge point for people looking to master their empathy. So remember that half-day training I mentioned that I had on Sunday, it was all about energetic regulation. So working with the 4 keys of energetic regulation, which are clearing, grounding, cultivation, and protection. And we're not really going to go into that today, but managing our energy is one of the big challenge points that we confront when we're working with mastering our empathy. So how to protect ourselves, how to ground ourselves, how to clear our energies, and how to cultivate and build our field. So this idea of we cannot selectively numb ourselves, we can't selectively turn off. Most of us look to that as a defense mechanism. And honestly, it's a pretty good defense mechanism, right? If we're looking at survival strategy of, oh my gosh, I have 70 to 80% of my energy doesn't actually belong to me. I feel really overwhelmed. I'm feeling pain that doesn't belong to me. I'm just going to shut that down, right? That seems like a pretty good idea. And it's our bodies trying to protect us. It's our energy selves trying to protect us. And yet, it might be a good kind of short-term survival strategy, but ultimately we also close ourselves off emotionally. We close ourselves off to forming deep connections. We close ourselves off to our intuition and connecting with our guides. We close ourselves off to our own spiritual practice, right? We end up shutting all the doors. And so again, good short-term strategy for that's a lot of pain and I don't want that. I'm going to close that door. Not effective holistic life strategy. So no numbing, thank you very much. Numbing is not a useful thing in the long term. We've got other ways to manage that and to deal with that. And probably the last big challenge that I see of mastering empathy is around this idea of energetic shouting, right? And I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean with that, where we live in a society where most people don't know this stuff. Most people are not aware. Most people are not in tune with their energy. Most people aren't connected to subtlety. And so what happens, and let's kind of imagine this in terms of someone who's hard of hearing, right? Someone who's actually, deaf or has a hearing impairment, they tend to talk a lot louder, right? Not because they're trying to be an a-hole, but just because they can't actually tune into the subtleties of it. Right? And so it's not that they're trying to cause problems. It's just that their impairment causes them to increase the volume of their energy or their voice. And the same goes with energy. If we have someone who's not tuned into subtleties, their energy tends to be a lot louder, meaning their emotions kind of spray all over the place. Their energy body tends to be really aggressive in certain ways. And I don't think that's really the right word, but have you ever come across, you know what I'm talking about? You come across somebody who has really loud energy that you're just like, whoa, I can hear you. I can hear you from a mile away. Like I'm feeling a little much about that. Anyone ever had that experience? Right? As opposed to someone who is very sensitive, right? And can regulate their energy in such a way as to not be shouting at people, not be blasting people out. Have you ever met someone like that? Right? And really it comes down to this kind of happy medium of how do we regulate our energies so that we can, be heard, right? We want to be heard, but we don't want to shout. We don't want to be like blasting all the time. That's exhausting. And other people we look at blasting their energy everywhere. That's exhausting too. So let's see. Tish, okay, great. Tish, we'll see you later whenever you tune back in. Okay. Jess says, yes, absolutely. Great. How about let's take 1 minute before we look at some tools and practices for this. Let's tune in. Are there any questions or comments about the challenges of empathy? Challenges of mastering empathy. How's this landing for you? Anyone having like epiphany moments or oh hell yeah moments? This is making sense. Manka says, I like the shouting part. Yeah. Okay. Around like people kind of, okay. Jess says, I think for me, I just get tired of feeling like I'm managing all these energies. And then yes, I get overwhelmed and succumb to the energies and shut down from over managing. Yeah. That's totally a thing. What Jess is describing, right? Anybody else ever feel like that sometimes? right? We're just like, ah, God, I'm processing everybody's energy through my body. Like, enough. I don't need that. Yeah. Stacy says, I haven't thought about others' empathic experience so deeply. Interesting. Can you say a little bit more about that? Either unmute yourself or keep typing.
Yes, I haven't thought about when you talked about other people like screaming or having different experiences. I haven't thought about their experience as much as I've thought about how I'm managing it or how it's impacting me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Because again, we live in a world where we're all empaths. We all have this capacity, and most of us either numb it out, don't ever develop it. And so then we're working essentially, if we think about in terms of our collective development, we have a whole society full of babies or toddlers, right? And imagine a baby or toddler who wants something and is trying to communicate that, like they end up screaming and crying, right? Because that's their effective strategy to have something happen, as opposed to being able to ask for what they want, right? But all of that, if we're looking in terms of empathy, and we're looking in terms of emotional and energetic communication, the energetic equivalent of screaming for what you want is blasting it out and, shattering people's energetic eardrums, so to speak, right? We've all heard the high-pitched scream of a baby who wants something, and that's what we're living with. And it can be very ear-splitting, right? So then we want to put in earplugs and say, no thanks. So then how do we manage this? Let's talk about some of my favorite tools. I see Maka getting ready to take notes over there. Awesome. Great. How do we deal with this? So these are some of my favorite tools on how to master empathy. Number one, let's do a little bit of a reframe, right? Where we're, let's see. I invite you to think of empathy as charity work, energetic charity work. And I'll use the example of animals. Does anyone have an animal? Or have you had the experience of being with an animal or petting an animal where you're having a crummy time and then you just start petting them and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it just kind of drains out of you and you feel better from being with this animal? That's energetic charity work. That's empathic charity work, where another being is helping you process energy through your body and your emotional field and letting it release so that you feel better. And we can look at, is this done in a healthy way, right? Are then being cleared out? Is it then being released, or is it staying stuck in their body, right? That's part of the problem with this. But if we look at empathy as charity work, it can change our frame a little bit. Meaning, how are you living in the world and how are you using your empathy, your power of empathy, to help the collective experience process energy that other people might not have the tools to process? Most people do not have tools to process energy healthily and effectively. Now, I'm saying this, this doesn't mean you have to do this, but it does. I invite you to consider, what are you doing? What are you offering for the collective by having empathy? So that's kind of this one piece of empathy is charity work. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that can work. Jess says, love that. Awesome. I'm glad. So how do we do that? Number one, we cultivate discernment. Remember, we talked about discernment, right? Being able to tell what's mine, what's not mine. So this is where we look at, again, tuning into the energy body. What of these energetic signatures that I'm noticing actually belong to me? What do not belong to me? And what is in the highest and greatest good for me to do with that? Does it need to be released? Does it need to be processed? Does it need to be forgiven? Does it need to be acknowledged in some way? And that simply comes from practice. Simply comes from, and this is part of the exercise that we're going to do, is around tuning into discernment. So number one is discernment. Number two is cultivation. Here, I'm going to give you another metaphor that I think is going to illustrate this really well. Remember, we talked about someone who's hard of hearing and this idea of kind of an inappropriate volume, right? So let's imagine you're in sort of a small room, or maybe you're in a car or your friend's car, and your friend has the radio volume pretty high for such a small space, right? It's on volume, I don't know, let's say it's bumping the car, right? And you're just, God, that's too loud. It feels really too loud for this small space. Now imagine that you're in a parking lot and your friend's having a tailgate party and the car is at the same volume, the radio is at the exact same volume, but all of a sudden you're in a parking lot. okay, it's actually the perfect volume for the parking lot. That feels really good. That's like, okay, it's loud enough to be kind of grooving, and people are walking around and people are chatting, but you can still hear the music. Awesome. Because you have a larger space, the volume is now appropriate. Now imagine that the car is inside a stadium and the stereo is at exactly the same volume. All of a sudden, in this much, much larger space, the volume seems way lower because there's a bigger container for that same amount of energy. This is the idea of cultivation, meaning that when your personal energy field is small and doesn't have a lot of space in it, some other energy coming in is going to feel a lot louder and more overwhelming. Versus, okay, if you have more space in your personal energy field, meaning you're cultivated, meaning you're grounded, you're centered, you have a really strong practice of amplifying your personal energy, that other energy coming in is not going to seem as loud. It's going to be like, okay, now I can hear this, I can deal with this, I can manage it. And if your energy is out here, you've got a big practice, you have a lot of personal space, a lot of personal energy, then other energies coming into your field are not going to rock you at all. It'll just be like that, stereo in a stadium. Like, oh yeah, I hear that. Okay, great. Now I can, whatever. It's very, very quiet. It's not really bothering me. I can go turn it off if I want to, or I can adjust it if I want to, or I can just kind of send it out. Does that make sense? This idea of cultivation, essentially, the more energy of ourselves that we have, the less stuff like this will bother us. So that was number 2. So number 1 is discernment, number 2 is cultivation, and number 3 is to move the energy through your body and your energy field. Stuff like this, empathy is really useful for doing healing work, for having compassionate connections, for being of service to your family and friends and loved ones. We don't want to get rid of empathy, but we don't want it to stick around. Essentially, if you're feeling a vibration from somebody else, meaning a physical vibration, an emotion, a thought form, a belief system, or something, we don't want it to stay. So this is where we can recognize it, meaning, oh, hey, I see you, and we move it through. I see you, and I understand that this doesn't belong to me, so I'm processing it and I'm releasing it. Getting it out of your body, getting it out of your system, out of your emotional field. And this is where it comes in to discern, is that mine or not mine? Do I have enough space where that's not kicking my butt? Okay, now I can go get that out of here, right? In a very compassionate way. The idea of, and one of the tools that we use to do that, so those were kind of our number 1, number 2, number 3, discernment, cultivation, and moving it through. One of the biggest tools that can support us in doing that is this term called intersubjectivity. I'll break that down for you. So everybody knows about objectivity, right? The idea of, oh, I can look at something and not be influenced by it. It's a very kind of scientific, very valued in the logical circles. And it's funny because I look at objectivity and I'm kind of like, well, objectivity doesn't actually exist, right? Like we look at something and we're inherently connected to it and influenced by it. But so we have objectivity, we have subjectivity, which is about, art and about interpretation and how am I affected by this thing and how am I feeling this thing? And then we have intersubjectivity, and this is where things get really interesting. Intersubjectivity is the ability to simultaneously feel our own body sensations, emotions, energy awareness, while also being aware of feeling another's body sensation, emotional awareness, energy, etc. So it takes subjectivity, right, of I feel this and I'm affected by this, and we're also adding in, this is like advanced emotional awareness and advanced empathy stuff right here. It's I feel my stuff and I feel their stuff at the same time, and I'm able to tell the difference. So there's a term for that. It's called intersubjectivity. This takes a lot of practice. So starting with number 1, number 2, number 3, discernment, cultivation, and moving it through, start with that. And know that intersubjectivity is kind of the advanced form of that. And this is where we're aspiring to get to, of how can I feel my stuff and also feel their stuff and know the difference and not take it on. That is empowered empathy right there. Our last piece that I have for us is treat empathy as communication rather than only receiving. And this plays into the intersubjectivity a little bit, right? So, oh, there are more comments. Okay, Jess says, sheesh, haha, I'm learning how to not take it on. Awesome, good. Okay, I'm curious what you're saying sheesh about, but go ahead and keep typing, and I'll keep talking so we can get through other things. So treating empathy as communication rather than as simply receiving, right? So kind of like what Stacy was saying about thinking about our own empathic experience of, oh, I'm taking on other people's stuff. I'm on the receiving end. Remember that energy works both ways. Empathy works both ways. Other people are feeling our stuff too, whether they know it or not. And this is where we get to be truly empowered in terms of using our own energy to positively influence our environment and other people's fields. Yay! This is, again, it's like, let's turn this magic on its head a little bit. And instead of just being on the receiving end of empathy of, okay, I'm feeling all the other people's stuff, how can I invite other people to receive my energetic resonance? How can I vibrate a certain frequency that is powerful and inviting and an attractive frequency, right? Like joy is a very powerful, very inviting frequency. And when we vibrate joy, we're inviting other people's mirror neurons and other people's energy bodies to also vibrate joy or love or compassion or forgiveness or humor or whatever it is that we're vibrating, or health. So practicing being that tuning fork, instead of just being on the receiving end all the time, let's be that frequency that we're influencing other people and influencing our environment. That is also truly empowered empathy. Again, intersubjectivity and using empathy to send and influence an energy field. Awesome. Jess says, I'm learning how to not take it on. Intersubjectivity, having the awareness of this is mine and this is theirs. I feel both, but I'm not going to take other person's stuff is where I'm working on. Awesome. Yeah, great. We start with that. We start exactly with that. And the last two pieces that I'm describing about intersubjectivity and about the treating empathy as communication, those are a little more advanced because they require having these other tools in place. Being able to do that requires, number one, that you be able to discern. Number two, that you be able to cultivate. And number three, that you be able to move energy. And then once you do that, you'll be able to do these things. You'll be able to use empathy as energetic communication, and you'll be able to practice this intersubjective awareness. Any questions or comments, epiphanies? I saw people writing stuff down. How'd that land for you? How does that way of empathy sound? Do we want that? Does that sound good? Does that sound more fun, more empowered?
I'm so ready to start inviting people into my own frequency.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I'm so done with the over responsibility, and now I want to be that pillar. Yeah. Just like all the time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
David tuning forks, Jess. You got this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. I'm glad that landed. Yeah. Any other comments before we shift gears a little bit? How's this feeling? Feel good? Feel like I'm still figuring that out, or feel like I don't know what to do? Where are we at on that? I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay, great. Okay, we're gonna do our last little exercise here. We're gonna keep this pretty brief, but know that you can take this a little farther. Okay, so go ahead and set it all aside, set everything aside. And once again, coming back into the body, this subtle awareness and closing the eyes. And taking a couple of breaths to once again tune into your body and your energy field, just like you were at the beginning of class today. And starting to notice, again, what you notice, the state of your body, the state of your mind, the state of your heart, of your energy. And we're going to invite in, very simply, a degree of discernment, of asking ourselves, what of this is mine? And what of this is not mine? How much of this is mine? How much of this is not mine? And just take a moment to get a general picture. We're not trying to pick it apart. We're not trying to overanalyze at this point. We're just starting to see, can I tell the difference between energy that belongs to me and energy that doesn't? What does it feel like? Are there any specifics you can notice of what your energy feels like and how you know? What energy that doesn't belong to you feels like and how you know that? Whatever you notice, go ahead and give yourself a deep bow of gratitude and acknowledgement. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for taking this space and time for this practice today. And let's invite all of this awareness to come back with you to present time consciousness, arriving back in the moment that is now. Coming back to this space and time, gently wiggling the fingers and toes, opening the eyes. Really, really quick, is there anyone who would like to share what that experience was like?
I only had the brief words coming to my awareness, but no special discernment. So I need to work on that more.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, great noticing, Manka. Okay. So this practice that we just did a very brief version, but this is how we start, is just by feeling the difference. What does my energy feel like? What does not my energy feel like? And how do I know? That's where we start cultivating discernment. Great job, everybody. Go ahead and give yourselves a hug. Wrap your arms around yourself. Yay, great job. I'm amazing. Okay. Beautiful. All right. So we have just a couple of minutes left here, and I have some very brief things to share with you. Is that okay? Can I get a yes or a thumbs up in the chat box? Manka gives a thumbs up. Awesome. Great. I have an invitation that I would love to share with you, and that is around this 4-day training. I've mentioned it a couple of times already. I was talking about it a little bit at the beginning of our class time today. If you have enjoyed this work, and if you've enjoyed these free classes and these little snippets of teachings, you will love I Am Lightworker. I Am Lightworker is a 4-day, all day for 4 days, intensive healership training experience coming up in October 10 through 13. It'll take place at my favorite retreat center out in Banks, Oregon. It's just outside of Portland. And it's going to work with all of these principles that we've talked about so far and more, giving tools, giving practices, giving activations, giving a lot of healing work, and working with your community of lightworkers, working with your tribe. We're still in early bird, and I have it's about a quarter full at this point. So it's coming up in October. A handful of spots are already taken, and now's really the time if you decide that you want to do that. So the way in which you go about doing that, I will send an email sometime later today, coming up in the next couple of hours, that will have a link to that training. If you want to apply, go ahead and submit your application, and you can claim your early bird spot. Actually, you know what? I'll just post the link in the chat box right now so we can start doing that. So early bird goes until the end of July, and I am about to announce this out to my online community. And so right now, I've only been taking applications from people who are either already working with me or who have worked with me before. And this is going to be in front of a lot more people coming up here really soon. So I just pasted that link into the chat box so you can click on it if you like. It hasn't been in front of my entire online community yet because I want to give first dibs to people like you who are showing up and doing this work. So since you're tuning in here live, or if you're tuning in listening to the recording later, it means that you are showing up, you're doing the work, and I want you to have first dibs to apply. The link is right there in the chat box. If you're looking at this later, I'll send it as an email and put it in the comments on the video so you can submit your application. Now, early bird price, because the price is going to go up here in just a few weeks. Early bird price is if you pay in full, you get to save. You save about 10%. Pay in full for $997, or you can do 3 payments of $367. And that's 3 payments over 3 months. You get to spread it out a little bit. And again, the price will be going up here in just a few weeks. So if you want in, now's the time to claim your spot and claim your early bird price. Again, spots are about a quarter full already, and I haven't even put it out to everybody yet. So that's just based on my select group of invitations that have gone out. So this is the opportunity for you to step into your healership and become the fully empowered healer that you were born to be and that you are here to be for yourself, for your own life, for the lives of your loved ones, and for the world, to be part of this greater shift in consciousness and be part of this global service in your Lightworker community. So if that resonates with you, then go ahead and get your application in as soon as possible. We can talk about what that means for you. And then my giveaway, I wanted to give something to you. And so the giveaway for today, it's a little bit different every time. The giveaway for today is if you want to talk about your healership path. And we can talk about this in general, but also if you want to talk about if I Am Lightworker is a good fit for you, then I am gifting you a session. So this is an opportunity to talk with me about who are you as a Lightworker, what is being asked of you in your Lightworker service, what do you need for that to happen? And then if it feels like a good fit and you're curious about I Am Lightworker, we can talk about if that 4-day training would be appropriate for you. So I'm going to send that out in an email, and it is limited to the first 2 people who respond. So this email is going out to everyone who registered for the class today. So if you see it, and you want to talk, jump on it really quickly and claim one of those free sessions to talk about your healership journey. Again, that's limited to the first 2 people. So keep an eye out for your email later. Jess says, thank you. Awesome. You're welcome, Jess. And I hope to talk to you soon. So I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining class. It looks like everybody had to pop off. We're just a couple minutes over, but thanks for sticking around. I'm so excited to see you again on next month's class for August 20th, where we're talking about cultivating intuition. So you'll have a link to register in the email as well. You'll get, and that email will include the link to the recording of this class. It'll include the link to register for next month, the link to claim your session if you want one of the 2 free sessions that I'm offering, and then also the opportunity to apply for I Am Lightworker training. So I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you later.